Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to The Courage to Change, a recovery podcast. My name is Ashley Lowe Blassingame. I almost forgot my name, and I am your host. Today, we are talking to Ben Moroski. Ben is an LA Drama Critics Circle Award nominated writer and actor. His plays have garnered numerous Los Angeles Theater Awards and nominations. His first LA-produced play, The Vicious Minute, recounted his years-long battle with self-injury after being raised in a cult. Upcoming acting roles include the forthcoming short films Admitted and Discharged, which he also wrote and produced, both of which shed light on the current state of the American mental health care system and the vulnerable people it affects. Okay, hold on to your seats, ladies and gentlemen. Ben is amazing. And I just want to say, for the record, for those of you who have been listening to this podcast for 2 seasons, I really didn't know he was in a cult. I found him because he's an amazing self-injury advocate and mental health advocate. And it turned out that he had grown up in a cult. So just for those of you who have started to wonder if I have a cult obsession, I cannot confirm or deny, but I did not know about this one. So anyway, the point being, Ben is amazing. He does amazing work in the arena of self-injury. His story is so gripping, and we tried to keep it digestible in a way that would really speak to anyone who's ever struggled with any type of addiction, depression, wanting to hurt themselves in any way, shape, or form. I hope that you leave this episode knowing that mental illness, or being reminded that mental illness does not look or sound or act in one specific way, that it doesn't have to fit in a box, that self-injury does not need to be a 13-year-old girl who is having angst. And I really just appreciated how Ben was able to show us that and to highlight how he has been able to grow out of those detrimental coping skills and what he's been able to do for his mental health. So without further ado, I give you Ben. All right, episode 51. Let's do this. Ben, thank you for being here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And thanks for reaching out.
Yeah. How's your quarantine going?
Yeah, it's going. I work from home, so I've been able to keep it's funny. Yes, it's some semblance of the same schedule, but at the same time, there's just such a different energy in the world right now that
so true.
I think I think I made the mistake of thinking my life was going to stay the same just because I work from home, and then it's like, wow, what's all this building up inside of me that feels weird,
Yes. No, I totally relate to that because I have a office outside the house, but I also, mostly I can work from home, and I go to school, and so I do work online, but there's something different in the world. It feels so different.
Yeah, and I do closed captioning for live TV, so it's all doing the closed captioning for a lot of local news stations and stuff. So most of the news, everything's being filtered through the lens of coronavirus right now. So it's just like inundated on all fronts. So as everyone is, of course, but my work also happens to be. So yeah, but overall good.
You guys just got a dog, right?
Yeah, 3-year-old English Bulldog rescue. Yeah, so she's a bit of a project, but we're excited. And I've never personally, I have dogs growing up, but this is my first dog as a gainfully employed adult. So
welcome.
Yeah,
welcome
thank you.
It's awesome. So I found you online, and you did a podcast with a friend of yours, and a story, your story is around self-injury, and something I really wanted to talk about on this podcast, and from a male perspective too, which is not as commonly talked about. Actually, it's probably very common. It's just not as commonly talked about.
Yeah, I think statistically it's, I think the rough statistics are 60-40 female to male. So it's there are a lot of,
a lot.
Yeah, it's obviously stereotypically viewed as much more female teenager kind of thing that people deal with, but it's the statistics are actually fairly even. So it's definitely interesting.
There you go. And that's exactly, I have a bunch of stories on this podcast that talk about things that men experience that are, stuff around the Me Too movement, things that are typically talked about from a female perspective that I really wanted to find men that were willing to talk about. So I'm thank you for being here and doing that. And tell me a little bit about where you grew up. Your dad was a professional football player, and a little bit about your family.
Yeah. So my parents are high school sweethearts. You grew up in Northern California.
I did, yeah.
Or spent time in Northern California.
Yeah.
I listened to the first episode of the podcast and I was like, oh yeah. My parents grew up in the Bay Area. They're from Novato, and we're high school sweethearts. My dad played football in the NFL for 8 seasons. He was a backup quarterback, and I have 2 older brothers. They were both born when my dad was playing. My
49er?
Oldest brother, he played for the 49ers for 1 season. Yeah. He backed up Joe Montana, threw Jerry Rice a touchdown pass.
Awesome.
Yeah. So he played his first 6 years in Atlanta for the Falcons. My oldest brother was born there. Then he played in Houston when the Oilers were still a thing, played for the Oilers for a season. My brother Will was born in Houston, and then he played for the 49ers for a season. And then I was born after that, and he retired, and my parents moved back to Davis, California, where I grew up. My dad had done his undergrad there and played football there, and went back to get his master's and start coaching. So when my dad, I think around his rookie season in the NFL, he and my mom became born again Christians. And so when they came back to Davis, they were looking for a church.
That had to have been hard on the NFL road. Was it like, did they see something in it going on, or do you have any idea like what triggered that? Their
conversion to Christianity, or
it was during his rookie season, right? And they become born again Christians. I mean, during a rookie season, there's lots of stuff you can get involved in that isn't that. What do you think led or drew them in that direction?
I feel like I would be guessing because I just haven't talked to them about that in a while, but I do know that there was and still is a large evangelical Christian community in professional sports. So there were Christian guys on the team. There were always guys who were professing Christians on the teams.
Got it. Okay.
And that sort of thing. So there's definitely, that is like a part of the culture of the NFL, as I understand it, and has been for a long time. So there was that sort of portion of people within the sport.
Got it. Okay. I'm picturing ballers.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Right.
So you go to right. You go to the NFL and you find Jesus. I'm not sure. That's not the road I would have pictured.
I know. And I think it's still obviously it's not the majority. And so it's definitely still a fairly unique path, I think. But they, and neither of them were raised religious, particularly. So they were church shopping when they got to Davis and tried a number of places and found this place called Grace Valley Christian Center. And I was born and they started going there. And and we were there from basically when I was born. We were in Davis and going to Grace Valley from when I was born up until I was 21.
Okay. And you were born in 88.
88. Yeah.
88. Okay. And tell me about, so that this Grace Valley Christian Center, this was a unique place, and not, one would say it wasn't your average born again Christian church. Is that?
Yeah, it's an interesting place because it has this facade of definitely being your average, Christian place. It's definitely, I think if you visited there once, you'd be like, oh, this is a bit intense, because it's definitely. So it started by the pastor. He was called by God and started this church in the late 70s in Davis. And so it's his church. It's non-denominational, and everything runs through him. There are elders, deacons, whatever your word you want to use. But they're all under him, and the buck stops with him. And so a service is pretty intense as far as like the the sermon will be 45 minutes to an hour long and be like everyone's taking notes, and it's very much like, let's study the Bible. And that's what really drew my parents to it initially. Two things. One was the sort of intense seeming Bible study and like really getting in there and like understanding what it's all about. And then the other thing that's really attractive about Grace Valley is people are genuinely nice. I mean, I remember once we left, and the girl I was dating and I, at the time, we went to other churches to just, it's ingrained. So finding another church, and basically every single church we went to, we could have been ghosts. People don't pay you any attention, and everyone's there. And I don't mean that in an overly negative way, but it was definitely like, okay, so I could see the appeal of somewhere like Grace Valley, where people are, the first time someone shows up, people are asking them over to lunch like that day, genuinely interested in them. And again, it's funny. It's like, it kind of sounds like it's not like Get Out, where it's like, come into our,
Yeah, like right.
It's not a fake sense of hospitality, or like people are being forced to do it. It's people taking a genuine interest. So that was also, I think, attractive to my parents, was people who were interested in them and their lives.
Those two things make complete sense. I mean, if you want to learn more and be closer to the book and understand, and also be with friendly people who care about you, that's not a long shot. So that makes sense.
It's a great pitch, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
It's a great pitch.
What went wrong, for lack of a better word?
So over a course of time, as you stay there, new members take a new member class where you're kind of you're kind of introduced to the way that Grace Valley teaches the Bible. Granted, I was born into it, so I never had to take the new members class. And then you at some point you become a member, and that's like you sign something, and there's always, when people have finished the new members class, there'll be it'll be part of a church service, and people are introduced as new members, but they treat the membership at the church like a marriage.
Okay. Like
it's a binding contract.
Okay.
And so over the course of years, and my mom and I talk about this a lot, but your friend circle outside the church becomes smaller and smaller. When I went from kindergarten to fourth grade, I went to public schools. And then when I was going into fifth grade, the church started a school that was K through ninth. And so everyone was pulled out of public school and went to the church school. So from fifth grade to ninth grade, I was spending more waking hours on church property than I was at home. I lost all my friends, from public school, and not because, obviously when you're a kid, you're being driven by your parents' places, and
right, life happens,
and you're friends with who you're around. But if the only people you're around is people from the church, again, it's like the circle shrinks. It's not a cult in the sense of like people are still in the community. My dad was a football coach at UC Davis. There were a lot of, doctors, lawyers, like prominent community people in the church. But there's lots of encouragement to do things the church's way, and not, it's very much a kind of place where it's like, well, we didn't tell you couldn't do that. And it's like, well, no, yes, there is.
Right. But no, you sure didn't, you sure mentioned how you didn't like it. Right. Right.
Yeah. And then at the base level, and this is the stuff I've gotten away from because I just have a bit of a more difficult time recalling it because it's been a few years now, thank God, that we've been out. But it's definitely very much, it's evangelical Christianity, and it's very much original sin. Everyone's a sinner, and a very much like guilt and shame based environment. So, and a lot of like, don't trust your emotions, don't trust your thoughts. The devil's going to put bad thoughts in your head. And while you can't control that, it's definitely up to you whether you choose to entertain them or not, So that kind of mentality definitely leaves the door open to then be like, well, then you tell me, we'll tell you what's right and what's wrong.
Right.
And that sort of thing.
What did you think about God when you were a kid? Like, what were your what were your thoughts about what God was or what Jesus was, what religion was? Did you feel like, was there any place where you felt like you were loved by God, where even though that as long as you didn't do these things that you were okay? Or was it like, did you leave with this idea, like, I have this loving community, I have this loving God, but if I do these things, it's bad? Or is it more like, no, it's like, I'm all bad. I'm all original sin. I'm all like, was there an upside?
I mean, I think there was definitely an upside in a certain sense because, I mean, it's all I knew. I was born into it. So it's the community that you're raised in. So it was just we're like, God is love, but what does love look like? Love looks like, love from a parent looks like disciplining you physically. You know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah. That makes sense.
Love from God means, God's wrath on the world is a form of his love,
Right.
Okay, sure.
Right. So what did that do for you? I mean, was this the impetus for the self-injury?
I guess. I mean, I think it was I started cutting myself when I was a senior in high school, and I was a very good rule follower all the way along. Like the highest award in ninth grade, it was the last grade in the school at the church, was the pastor's award. And I won the pastor's award. And yeah, so then after graduating ninth grade, then you go back to public high school.
Oh, okay.
So went to Davis High School. Ironically enough, the mascot for Davis is the Blue Devils. So there were definitely some church members who were not thrilled with that. So, and I played, I was the starting quarterback on the football team, and I was, I suppose, relatively, popular or whatever, but everyone knew that I was a Christian and went to Grace Valley, so it was the kind of thing where in classes, sometimes people would be like, hey, your church is a cult, right? And be like, oh, that does not compute with my brain, but, I think getting toward the end of high school, football season was over, senior year. We weren't that good. It was, I also ran track in the spring, but I think it was getting toward that end, getting toward a massive transition in life, and in a community that strongly encouraged people to stay put and go to UC Davis if you were going to go to college or go to one of the community colleges in the area, but like stay and serve God's kingdom here, Now, why God's kingdom centered around a church in Davis, California, with a total membership of 400 people, I don't know to this day. But that was the very, very strong encouragement. And I applied to some other schools, but it was never even in my brain that I would go somewhere else. I sort of think of it like what are those like shock collars that you can buy for a dog, so like they stay within the edges of your property line.
Right.
Then it's like if they wear it enough, it's like no. Why didn't you just leave? There's no fence,
right? Right, exactly.
But there's an invisible sense of
right,
and something that I couldn't have even put my finger on then, But for whatever reason, I started cutting my stomach. Just really lightly. I would get razor blades out of disposable razors and cut my stomach. And I think it definitely initially came from a place of, I knew that I wasn't supposed to use drugs. I wouldn't have even known where to get drugs, frankly. But I knew I wasn't supposed to drink. So those things were clearly sins, right? Sex, clearly a sin. So all very, so whatever this behavior was that I had discovered was something that no one had told me was right and wrong. It didn't fit in to that. So I had access to it, where I didn't have to feel guilty about it, and I didn't really know what I was doing. And I still look back and I'm like, I just don't even remember being exposed to self-injury at all. I remember in the play that I wrote there, I do reference like the one time I remember seeing, there was a guy on our football team who had two like crosses carved into his chest, scarred. And someone had asked him, we were in the locker room and I had just overheard it in passing, and someone had asked him how that, what that was from. And he said he did it himself. And I remember thinking that was the weirdest fucking thing ever. Like, why the fuck would you do that to yourself? So that was maybe a year or two previous, so that was kind of the place I was coming from. So it wasn't like I knew what self-injury was at all. Didn't even know the term. So I started cutting my stomach, and it was easy to hide. And then as senior year came to a close, and I was like, even in public high school, it was like I was a starting quarterback of the football team. I was one of the student speakers at graduation. But by the time graduation rolled around, I was definitely starting to cut more, and I was cutting in different places. I had started to cut around my wrists, and not really with any sort of. I don't think it was nothing about it being suicidal. It was, I needed something more to happen. I mean, I needed there to be more blood. And it's funny. I much later when I was when going in and out of treatment, my mom would say to me, Ben, you don't need to prove something to ask for help. You can just ask for help. You don't need to show something. But after growing up, and another thing with Grace Valley was mental health was very much poo-pooed. I mean, it was basically like, if you sin less, you won't be depressed,
Right.
So fucking work on it.
I found the opposite to be true.
Right? Yeah. Same. Trial and error ever since.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, that doesn't check out.
Yeah. One of the first things that really hit me when I was in treatment was, and I don't remember if it's part of DBT or not, but the idea of, if you're feeling guilty about something you shouldn't feel guilty for, keep doing it until you stop feeling guilty about it. Keep going in that direction. If you're having a response that doesn't.
Yeah. Can't change it. You're like, no way. Yeah.
Right.
That's the kind of thing I would take and run with. But yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So is that a common desire to bleed, to have more, like, is that a common is that a common desire of someone who's doing self-injury, or just that was to you for your?
I mean, I can really only speak to my experience, but it was, I wouldn't say that I thought about that consciously, like off the bat. Again, I think it was one of these things that the practice changed, it evolved. And I think, like a lot of other things, you need more of the thing to get a response. Yeah. So, and more of the thing could be the place on my body. If it's more visible, I'm going to get a bigger response. I'm going to get a bigger rush. And if it's more serious, and there's a sense of like fucking, there's a sense of that competitive, that athletic kind of competitive side of it, where it's like, I could do that, but I could do that. I did it that bad before. So if it's not up to at least that, then like, come on, what the hell are we doing here? Why are you even, talking to yourself? It's like, why are you even wasting my time?
Right. Interesting. I didn't think of it from that perspective. So were people able to see, when was the first time anyone noticed?
So two things. The first time I ever cut myself, I do remember that. And that was, I was like, I think I'd like masturbated and felt really guilty about it, because that was not supposed to do that in the church. And I was like, okay, so I cut a cross into my right palm, and I don't even have a scar from it. Your palms are pretty hardy, but it was like, okay, I want a visual reminder so I won't do that again, so that was the first time I ever did it. Now, when I started doing it regularly, cutting my stomach, it wasn't so much from that kind of punishment or like I need a reminder about something place. It was much more of an experimental place. But to get back to your question, I was living at home with my parents, obviously at the end of high school. And then when I started college, I also lived at home through college as well. But at the end of high school, it was a couple weeks after high school ended. Actually, it was the Monday after. So I had given the speech, we'd done grad night, it had been fun. And the Monday after, I wrote a note that I suppose was a suicide note. I don't know. I think it's easy to label things in retrospect when they're a lot murkier at the time. And I got some razor blades and some candy, and I drove to, where did I end up? I think I was like, somehow ended up in the parking lot of the DMV.
That'll make you want to kill yourself for
right?
sure.
I know, exactly. So, it's like just the desolate wilderness of the DMV.
I mean, it's a little,
it's a bit on the nose,
Where did you find him? The DMV. Well,
yeah.
I told him not to go. What does God say about the DMV?
And I cut my wrist pretty bad. And then I didn't really know what to do. I was bleeding, and I was bleeding onto my shorts, and I just drove around and parked at some other places, and then like a couple hours later, I had to pee really bad.
Unexpected things that come up,
right? And I was like, I'm gonna have to get out of the car,
right?
Okay. So I was out on Davis is surrounded by a lot of agriculture and open fields and stuff. And I got out of the car and just peed on the side of the road. And then it was, for whatever reason, just clicked in my head. I was like, I just need to go home. I don't know, And I got home and my parents didn't know where I'd been. I just kind of left, and it was the afternoon, but it was still I was out of school and I just kind of disappeared. I don't know. I don't think I had a cell phone at that point. I didn't get a cell phone until I think I started college. But I parked across the street, and my mom came out of the house, and she saw me, and she came over to the car, and I rolled down the window, and she didn't see at first, and she was asking me where I'd been. And then she looked in and saw my wrist and my shorts, and it's one of the very vivid memories I have in my life. And she asked me if I was trying to kill myself, and I said I didn't know, and I broke down crying. And and she helped me back into the house, and she cleaned it up, and it wasn't bad enough to where I needed anything done other than it to be bandaged. And at that point, my mom obviously told my dad, and then they made the decision that I needed to go talk to the pastor, because that was always the first line.
Right. He'll know it.
Unless you were going through something medically, again, the mental side of things, it's it's related to, God can, I don't know, but it was definitely that is the first step. And I don't remember telling my dad this, but I told my dad, I guess, before. I was like, I know exactly what's going to happen. He's going to preach a sermon at me, and that's going to be it. And it's funny that I look back and I'm like, wow, how did I sort of have an awareness of what that experience was going to be? And yet, we were there for, 4 more years. I think part of it is, I think the people watch documentaries about cults and stuff, and they're like, well, why the fuck are you still there? Just leave. How did you not just leave? And I really think that you don't leave a place like that until something touches you personally enough that opens your eyes.
And you were born into it. And
I was born into it. And I wasn't going to leave on my own. I knew I had friends who left on their own, and their families disowned them, excommunicated from the church. And a lot of times, when you lose a structure, the church would spin it as see, that person went crazy when they left. And it's no, they lost their entire support system and didn't have anywhere to turn except shitty places.
Right. Exactly.
So I went into this meeting, and so my dad took me over. Me and my dad were there. The head pastor was there. And then there's 2 other people in the room, one person taking notes, and the other associate pastor. And I'm like, oh, great. And it's this very dark, his office is very dark. It's very much like that, the office, Don Corleone's office in the first scene of The Godfather, that's this church office.
Okay.
Where it's this big wood desk, and he's sitting there, he's this little Indian man.
Not what I expected.
Yeah. So it's also, and he is he preached a little sermon to me, he was like, do you know how this makes your parents feel, basically, when you do these things? And I'm like, yeah, not good.
You're like, the DMV? Was it?
Right. Yeah. And he the verses that he referenced in the Bible he referenced from, I think, Genesis 4, could have the chapter wrong, but it's from Cain and Abel's story. And God comes to Cain and says, because Cain and Abel both bring sacrifices, God asked for a sacrifice. Cain brings the wrong sacrifice, and he's pissy about it because God didn't accept it. And God asks him, why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? Do you not know that sin is crouching at the door? It desires to have you, but you must master it. And that was the takeaway for me, I suppose. I don't really know. I suppose the message was, you're on the doorstep of making bad decisions. Clearly, the reason you're here is one of them. So get your act together and, be aware that the devil's there to,
So there was no why did you do this?
Not in that meeting. From that point, I was asked to meet with the senior associate pastor once a week at his house, at 6 a.m. before I went to classes at UC Davis, starting my freshman year. The first meeting he and I had was actually good. We actually had a genuine talk about why it had happened. But from that point, it turned into me memorizing large portions of the Bible and reciting them to him in his living room at 6 a.m. And then encouraging me to you need to start inviting people to church and sort of demonstrating your faith that way. And at some point, and I was still cutting at this point, I would roll in with gloves on. I mean, it was cold, but I would roll in with gloves on and my knuckles all, torn up with burns or whatever I had done. So it was not making a difference. I was living at home. So my parents still, my mom especially, very, very much on the pulse of what I was doing, whether I realized it or not, So she eventually was to my dad, look, these meetings need to stop because they're not helpful. So that was cool because that was one of the few times that, it was a situation where it was something the church wanted and my parents said, this is done. And at that point, I saw my first therapist. So
the real therapist, not a real, but a real therapist.
Yeah, someone qualified to talk about the issues. Yeah. Exactly. Well, and that's the thing that's so ridiculous about a place like Grace Valley is they think they can deal with everything in-house.
Right. I mean, there's so many places like that, and we hear that all the time. And, I think it's part of the stigma too around these issues is that they are, that it's not a physical issue, right? My hope is that even over time, because there is Christian counseling, right?
And I went to a Christian therapist. My first therapist was a Christian therapist.
Right. So it's not an impossible thing that someone would have a Christian therapist and they could have a Christian therapist in-house. It's just those people specifically aren't trained and they're dealing with something very serious.
Yeah. And if you're dealing, even if you had a Christian therapist in a place like Grace Valley, the problem is it's going to be too filtered through the dogma that they want to, rather than receiving the information from the client and responding to it. Right.
So where was this therapist?
I saw one that just wasn't a good fit. And he was in the Sacramento area. It was pretty far away from my house, but he was in the Sacramento area, far enough away to where he'd never heard of Grace Valley, which was a good thing. And so I saw him for a few years.
And what was different about that?
It was my first experience going to therapy. So it's funny because it's therapy, I feel so fucked up in a great way, I've done something to warrant outside help,
Right.
I have graduated. So I didn't know, it's my only exposure to therapy was Goodwill Hunting, where it's oh, cool. So it's this odd combative relationship where eventually we'll meet in the middle and find an understanding, know? And granted, I wasn't really equipped to talk about my life with a whole lot of candidness because of growing up in an environment where you're just editing yourself constantly. I shouldn't think that. I shouldn't feel that. I'm not going to say that because saying that is going to be entertaining a thought that could be sinful. But it was a good relationship. I look back and I'm I wouldn't see a Christian therapist now, basically, because I'm not a professing Christian. But I look back and I'm like, he was, he did his job as well as he could have done given the circumstances. And he even said things to me where it was like, and I don't remember what precipitated it, but said things like, wow, that church sounds spiritually abusive. And I was like, wow, I'm not familiar with that term at all,
But did that open up anything for you? I mean,
No.
You remember it? No, didn't.
But it was like this immediate, like, I'm receiving information that is out of line with what I should be thinking. And, there were times always in Grace Valley, and not always, but there were definitely times I remember when they were like, here's what to say if someone calls this place a cult kind of thing. And I don't remember what they
Do you remember what they would tell you to say?
I don't remember, but I think it was more, obviously I think that the take home was people are resistant to God's word, so they'll do anything to tear down the truth. The devil's out there and he can use anyone to tear down, the truth. It's at its basis, it's a persecution complex. If someone's saying something negative about me, I'm being persecuted because I'm doing the right thing.
And so by the time you get out to this person in kind of in the Sacramento area, what does your cutting look like? How regularly, like where is it in its progression?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because through college, it was off and on, and there would be times when it would be really bad, and then there were stretches where I wouldn't do it at all, months.
And what did really bad look like?
Really bad. Good question. I'm trying to think. Gosh, it's been a while with the college stuff, but just the size of, I started burning myself. Cutting was the first thing I did. And then I started burning myself, and I figured out how to, the spaces of skin I was burning were getting bigger, and the burning was getting deeper. And that sort of thing. And then again, the slow march of things becoming more visible. I continued to act during college, and I remember it's like I can place like certain moments of self-injury with, like, because I had to be in dressing rooms with people, and at this point I was hiding everything. So I was wearing long sleeves all the time, and then I was hiding the things that I was doing. So it was definitely and I was hiding my scars. I wasn't comfortable with them at all. Very ashamed of them. So I remember a play that I was in my sophomore year of college. I know that I had burns on the inside of my upper arms, on my triceps, like matching burns that were pretty bad and really painful in the healing process. But I remember having those and needing to hide them. And then things started to move out to my arms and move down my arms and just get more prominent that way.
I had so when I was using, I had a friend who, so I did some self-injury, but it just wasn't my thing. I had drugs and alcohol. Sure. I wanted to see what it was about. And it just, that was kind of who I was. And
no, totally. Yeah.
It was just, people are doing this, got to try it. And I was like, yeah, that hurts. So a couple times I thought, I know what I'm missing. I'm going to cut myself and pour the alcohol in it to see if I'll get drunk faster. That does not work. That hurts a lot. Just in case anyone was actually wondering. But I had a friend who I was very close to, and we used a lot of cocaine together, and she was really into self-injury and a lot of like what you talked about. And one thing that I thought was interesting was when we were using, we would have these kits of whether it was straws and credit cards and razor blades. And we would have these, these kits of things that we would go and we had this, mirror that we used to puff paint to like create our lines so we could do them while we were driving, because that was a good idea. And, because like, God forbid we pull over. We're in such a rush. You've
got to keep on your schedule.
Listen, we had places to be. we were 15 and going places.
Yeah, so you've got to be there on time.
Yeah, I didn't want to make anyone wait. So she had a kit. She had a self-harm kit. And it was one of those things where we were so fucked up. Like, just,
do you remember what the kit consisted of?
I do, because I remember thinking, And I not only do I remember but I remember being in the car and she had this little, I don't remember what it was in, but it had a razor blade, it had a lighter, it had a screwdriver, I think, or some sort of metal thing. And she had all these, so like I had like my drug kit and she had her drug kit in this thing. And we would go and we would pick up, I'll never forget being in a Safeway parking lot. We went and we picked up, 8 ball of cocaine, and I'm very excited about this. And she pulls out her self-harm kit, and we're in the middle of the day. And I know she wears long sleeves. She covered from head to toe and she pulls out her self-harm kit and starts burning herself with the screwdriver. And I'm looking at her like, now? Really? Like we just got an 8 ball. What are you doing? Like, do that. And my whole, I never asked her about it. I never, she was fully like, she could never, there was no amount of scar surgery that could have ever done anything for her.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just remember over the year, like when I look back at that, I was so self-involved that it just was not part of the thing. But I just remember like she used that literally the way that I used drugs and alcohol, and had the kit and had the whole thing. And there was, and I just remember this sense of ease and calm. Like
did she have any first aid stuff in her kit?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. She had the whole thing. It was all, and I just remember really thinking to like the few times that I had tried to self-injure, it was like, ow, this hurts. Okay. It's just a very different experience for me. And hers was a sense of ease and comfort and calm. It was done as like an emergency situation. I don't know, like we need to do it now. There was and I could see, and I never really brought it up with her, but I could see the difference. I could see it for what it was, as that coping mechanism that was something was going on. And it was the first time and probably the last time that I've ever seen anything like that. And it stuck with me as a lesson for what this was, that my experience with it other than that has been not that.
Yeah. I mean, it's a massive endorphin rush, causing that degree of pain. Triggers something in you. I mean, it's like runner's high, you go for a run and you
not
feel
my
that,
experience.
You know what I mean? But I mean, people talk about that, right? Yeah. Same. But it's, I mean, that totally rings with me 100%. I feel like self-injury too often is grouped into, I mean, the conversations about it are not happening, let's be honest, at all. Which is funny to me because it's like, yes, very slowly conversations around mental health are changing and getting better and more productive. And yet there are certain blind spots around issues that are self-injury being one of them that are hard to wrap your head around because the portrayals in pop culture are not really changing that drastically, but it gets lumped into, I do it. It's like, did you do it because you wanted to feel like I couldn't feel something and I wanted to feel anything? And it's like, or like, did you not feel pain? Did you not feel the pain? And I can't speak to anyone else's experience, but it's like, no, I feel the pain. The pain is part of the deal, but you're able to, it's reframed. It's not like, I remember I tell the story in the play where I remember I was in the room with my mom and my sister, and we were at home and I got a paper cut and I winced and I was like, ow, like, and they're both looking at each other like, how is he wincing about a paper cut with these big these big injuries? Right. And it's just a different context. It's all context.
Right. It's all context. I think one of the best ways to think about it is that alcoholism and addiction are self-injury. They're self-injury.
Yeah.
I mean, when I'm putting something up my, nasal cavity that I know is injuring me, I am self-injuring. I'm getting a high from it, but I'm self-injuring. When I'm putting a needle in my arm, I'm self-injuring. These are forms of self-injury. Make no mistake. It's an acceptable, we basically decide that the outcome is better than the harm. I mean, right? It's just a risk reward situation that we've decided. And as we progress, it gets crazier and crazier. And then at some point, that it makes that shift, but it is self-injury. And I was a piercer and I worked in a tattoo shop. And let me tell you how many people come into a tattoo shop for self-injury and call it being I need to get tattooed. I cannot begin to tell you, I'm stressed. I need to come in and get tattooed. Oh, I've been feeling the need to get tattooed. Not, I really would like this beautiful tattoo on my body.
Beautiful piece of artwork that means so much to me.
Right. Like how I get tattooed and how these people got tattooed was very different. I was like, oh, I hate this. Make it, like it just like, it was something I had to go through to get to the other side. There was never, ever a moment where I was like, I would like to get tattooed. But I saw so many people come in with the need to get tattooed and then pick a piece of art after. And that was and I would hear people saying like, oh, I'm addicted to getting tattooed. Like,
yeah,
like
not to the tattoos themselves, right? It's the process of it.
Nope. And it had nothing to do with the tattoos themselves. In fact, I saw people come in and ask other people to pick their tattoo.
I feel like in a casual conversation though, people could miss that.
Yeah.
It's a different thing, it's like, you're addicted to tattoos. It's like, no, that's not what they said.
That's not right. And people did the same thing with piercings.
Yeah.
And they would come in and get pierced, and so I do think kind of what you said, which is, I think this is more prevalent. I think it's out there. I think people have been able to frame it in a way that makes them feel less strange.
Yeah.
Do you think that drugs and alcohol would have done for you what cutting did for you, or self-injury rather? I don't
know. I didn't drink until I was 21. I was that good of a rule follower. And it was like, I'm not allowed to, not supposed to, breaking the law, also a sin. So when I started to drink, it definitely is definitely something that, and I've, read enough about self-injury that obviously a lot of people self-injure when they're on drugs or alcohol. But that can be a co-occurring thing. I think statistically, and I think it's referenced in that book that I sent you guys the link to, that men who self-injure do it drunk more than women who self-injure, statistically speaking. So it definitely was something that, because it's definitely, alcohol, it lowers your inhibition. So it makes it easier, to cross that, to just get over that natural resistance to attacking your own body.
Right. Do you think there's any relation to picking a fight? You're going to get the shit beat out of you, like when you're drunk, just to like want to have someone hit you, or is that just not?
I don't know. I think that's kind of like what you were just talking about, as far as like these sorts of things that are self-injury, even if we've grouped them into different categories.
Right.
Stay tuned to hear more in just a moment. Hello, everybody. This is Ashley Loeb Blassingame, the co-founder of Lion Rock Recovery and your host. Lion Rock Recovery has introduced a support meeting specifically for people struggling with anxiety related to the COVID-19 pandemic. Structured as an ongoing workshop, the COVID-19 anxiety support meeting will teach coping skills and be a place to share and connect with others also feeling the effects of this crisis. Everyone struggling with anxiety about COVID-19 is welcome. Let me repeat that. Everyone struggling with anxiety about COVID-19 is welcome. To view the meeting schedule and join a meeting in session, visit www.lionrockrecovery.com and click on the orange banner at the top of the page. You can't miss it. Together, we will learn to feel more centered and empowered in the face of this great challenge.
And so at this time, you have the burns. Now, you said you had them on both sides. So was there you had a method? Was it like, I have to be equal?
I don't know if symmetry was a thing, but I definitely know that I've placed every single injury I've given myself very consciously.
Okay. So that's part of it.
Yeah. That's definitely been part of it for me. So, yeah.
So did you ever have a situation, did things get infected? Did you ever have situations where things went wrong? You took it too far?
Honestly, nothing has ever gotten so infected that I had to.
Okay. So you never
deal with it.
Yeah.
I've gotten stitches once, and probably needed stitches on some other things that just healed into some pretty ragged scars.
So you're excellent at wound care.
I have gotten good at wound care, and I've figured out what's working in the first aid world and what products should be discontinued.
I like to think of myself as a first aid tester.
Exactly. Well, it is interesting. I do think there is an element of self-injury where the wound care and the healing process is very involved, and the degree to which you choose to take care of something or not, it's a huge part of it. And I mean, there's something therapeutic about healing yourself, about taking care of something, you know? And then there's the whole, I mean, there's the, you know, extended metaphor of, say you have a large injury, say a couple inch burn, and you have to keep it covered. And then you're covering it and keeping it covered with something like, say, paper tape, right, around the edges of whatever you're covering it with. And so by the time that the wound itself is healing, the area around it has become aggravated and torn up, you know, and your body's also focusing on healing the area. So it's just really interesting to me because I think about it in the context of my healing process and then the support system around me getting torn up, my parents getting torn up, you know, but everyone in the working toward a common goal. But it doesn't mean there's not, you know, ramifications and there's not collateral damage, you know?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. It's not linear. And I was making a face because when I went to dance school in New York when I was 15, and I branded myself, but not for self-injury purposes, for like cool factor, obviously.
I still look at people who have branding from like fraternities, and I'm like, why would you do that to yourself? Meanwhile, I'm covered in burns.
You're right.
You know, I'm like, oh God.
Yeah. That's amazing. Like, geez, so the best, but this is like classic. I don't know where the idea came from, but no one else was doing this. So like, it's not even like a whole group of people. But I didn't do it.
Like the whole dance studio wasn't.
No. And I remember like not thinking, this is like classic. Like I didn't think about like I had to wear, like you have to wear all this stuff when you're doing ballet and all these tights and different things. And so like I didn't think about the tights placement. Oh my God. You know, it was like this circle, like star, like it was like a pentagram, but not. And I mean, the whole thing was just classic, like, you know, just one of those things. But I ended up with this brand, and, you know, and my mother gets a call from the studio, like, so Ashley branded herself, and she's like, I'm sorry, what? You know, just like another, you know, so anyway, I was thinking of like the healing process because I remember thinking like, it's one thing in the moment. I was willing to take the pain for the moment, right? Because of the cool factor of, I don't know what. I did not, like pretty much everything, think through the fact that this was a long-term project. This was like,
and burns take a long, long time to heal. And it's a much messier process than a healing cut.
Oh my God. I had no idea what I was in for. So that's like when that's part of your thing, it's very involved.
Well, and it's not to say that like, I try to think of everything around it, but then there's still like, oh shit, I didn't think of that, of what I'm going to need to be doing or what, you know, where that placement exactly is. I have a burn in the space between your index finger and thumb, but like on that side.
Yeah.
And I was like, it sounds like a good idea in the moment, you know, and that took so long to heal because it's a place that flexes, you know. So you don't even though it was something I was doing regularly, it's you know, you can't account for everything.
Yeah. So one of the things that, do you self-censor on Instagram, or are you censored?
I'm censored heavily.
Okay. So I wanted to ask you about that because, you know, sorry to go back to counseling, but like, how does that make you feel to be like just a straight up picture of you?
Honestly, I think it's bullshit. And I think that part of the problem with Instagram's, Facebook doesn't seem to have rules about anything compared to Instagram at this point. But Instagram, it's like, part of me when it happens, and I don't know how it happens. I think that's one of the infuriating things. I think my understanding is that someone's flagging it. A person is, or it's being, I don't know why, because I kept track of when Instagram announced that they were going to be removing self-injury stuff. And I don't have a problem with that in theory, because people are entitled to their own opinions. I don't find it helpful to see pictures of open wounds. I think it's really triggering. I don't think it helps anyone else. If it's therapeutic to the person who's posting it, I can't really speak to that, but I don't think it's doing a service to anyone. I think people potentially have that opinion of some of the stuff that I post, but I really try to post things consciously. I never post things that are open. I only post scars, and I try to post them in a light that, that just doesn't play into the stereotypical, like, oh, I'm self-injuring, know?
Like you can't hear the music with it.
But I should be able to show my body if everyone else can show their ass on Instagram and not be censored, know?
Well, that was the thing. I remember I was looking through that, and I like, that is, I mean, there were pictures of you having lunch. There were pictures of you. There were pictures of you just like a headshot, or whatever. Like there was a rash a few months ago where someone went bananas on my profile and flagged like 50 things. And they're just pictures of you.
And I think that the upsetting thing is that there's no recourse for the person who gets flagged, really. Like, yes, I've gotten most everything's been put back up, but there's no, and it makes sense to me, of course, like they don't want to tell me who's flagged me in case I'm a crazy person and then I'm like, going after the person. And there are things that are legitimately flagged, but I think if my profile is being harassed by someone for whatever reason, I don't think that's okay. And I do think it's a detriment because I've definitely shifted how I talk about. I'm nervous when I post now, and I also choose not to use certain hashtags because I know that I limit the self-injury and self-harm hashtags I use, even though I know that they're potentially where I'm, and the reason I continue to do it, I'm not reaching some incredibly wide audience, but you never know. And I think I go back to when I was a teenager and I'm like, Instagram and Facebook weren't really a thing, but I'm like, that's where people are communicating now. So if it's the easiest place to reach someone now. And I think, would I have stopped if I had seen someone talk about it in the sort of candid way that I choose to? And no, I don't know if I would have stopped, but I would have had more knowledge and I would have known that people,
where to go. Yeah.
And I would have known something. That wasn't only, stereotypical or negative or making you feel like it's taboo. I also take issue with Instagram's, their resources where if you go to their resources thing, because I get a lot where it's like, a friend has reached out and is concerned about you, that thing. And you're like, and they're like, do you want more resources? So I've followed the links to see to see where it sends you, because I want to know what Instagram's thinking. And of course, the conversation, it's like, oh, this is where it's sort of like our structural conversations around mental health need to shift, or our conversations need to shift on a structural level, not just on a things are taboo, but you follow their links and under suicide, self-injury is listed under the suicide tab.
Oh, wow.
And it's like, well, you've missed the point from square one. So,
wow. Yeah. That's
so we're not even really able to have a real conversation about it because you're lumping two things in that are stereotypically linked, but are not scientifically linked at all.
And they're offering that as a resource. So they don't want you to post about it. They're going to censor that, but they're not even offering the right resources. Yeah. I mean, who's to say that you weren't in Afghanistan and you weren't, a prisoner of war, I guess it's sort of like, well, how do we choose to censor things, and how much do we give people the opportunity to decide what they're not going to look at if it bothers them? Like, for the love, just don't go to, or whatever. But I did notice that and did wanted to touch on that and see, was that, how that, because it's part of you sharing your message is very, and I want to, hear about how you've been able to get into recovery, but it's very important to talk about. And I mean, I found you with your hashtags and because you went on a podcast, and, we have 60,000 downloads all over the world. So it's not out of range of things that
totally, yeah,
you'd be able to touch a lot of people with this topic.
Well, and every time I post, I get, or not every time, but when I post on days like Self-Injury Awareness Day, or because a lot of times I'll post things with quotes that aren't mine, but because I don't like writing things that I have no patience for bumper sticker solutions to mental health problems. I just don't. It's because in the moment when shit's going down, it's not going to help. I need someone I would rather have someone be real with me, So it's like, I don't want to be overly, I don't mean to be cynical at all. But when I take the time to post something in my own words, undoubtedly I get at least, 1 or 2 or 3 people reaching out with, questions.
Yeah.
How do I deal with this?
Yeah.
So there people are looking for answers.
I think a big place that you would be very useful is to parents as well.
Yeah.
I bet that would be a very big resource for them.
Yeah. So, and I definitely have had people, because I was doing some writing for I keep in touch with my high school drama teacher, and I've written a couple plays for her on commission. But then, so I've kept in touch with some of my teachers from high school, and there have been moments when they've reached out and put me in touch with former students, or asked about if they could pass my contact information to parents, or that sort of thing. So, yeah.
So take us through what happened. How did you get to a place of recovery? What you went to? You said you went to a couple treatment centers. What was the first time you went to treatment?
So the summer after my junior year of college, we left Grace Valley. My brother had told my parents that he'd been molested by a family friend of ours in the church. Not a person in leadership, but by a friend of ours. And that's to go back to what we were talking about earlier, that's what I mean, where something has to touch you personally to take you out of a cult. You don't reason your way out of it on I've really studied the Bible on my own and, found that my beliefs don't line up with yours. It's like, no, some shit went down and your eyes open. My parents were told the church leaders, we need to leave. And the short version is they said no.
Why did they need to leave the church? Because there was a bad apple in it. How did they, do you know what I mean? How did that?
I think that it's a great question, because I think there were a lot of, obviously my telling of this story is not including just kind of the rising tide of not being happy there with shit getting more intense there. There was a revival over the summer where they really circled the wagons. A couple of my siblings really got thrown under the bus for stuff that they'd been doing and kind of raked over the coals fairly publicly in the church. My parents were, basically told they were bad parents. My parents led the college ministry for years. They were forced out of the leadership role. There was a lot in the context of it. And then also, my parents didn't want to go to church with the person who'd molested their kid and act like everything was okay, because that person was part of a family who was prominent in the church. They were some of our oldest friends, and everyone was members of the church. And if you're just going to say that you don't, so they hid behind the church hid behind their confession privilege or whatever to not need to report, because the guy had told them. So then it's it's a confession, so they don't have to report a confession to police.
Is that true?
There is a degree of confidentiality that religious leaders have in the context of a confession.
They don't have to report it, but your parents could have reported it, right?
And my brother did. It was an extended process, and that's a whole other story. But the version as it relates to this conversation is, my parents said, we're leaving the church. I was doing a theater apprenticeship back east the whole summer. I get home and they're like, we're leaving. And I was like, just like that, because it was one of those things you dream about that is never going to happen. It's like having a dream where you're flying. It was that level of outlandish. And then we were out. But in the process, we were immediately excommunicated, which on its own note is funny to me, because that's really not how excommunication works. It's excommunication is kicking people out of a church who still want to be there. It's no, we're gone. Thank you.
Right. Right.
But they always did this. Whenever someone would leave, they would excommunicate them, have a ceremony, basically, they label these, people who left, it's like people, you went crazy, or like you're like doing, you're like children of the devil if you leave. So that was our whole friend group. That was everyone we knew. We left, and we lost everyone. And Davis is it's a big, it's a college town, so there's enough people there, but it's small enough to where, you run into people in the grocery store and they turn the other way, see through you, don't even acknowledge that you exist. The girl I was dating at the time, my first girlfriend, she was not from Davis, but she had come to UC Davis and was a Christian and had joined the college ministry, and we'd met that way, and she'd become a member of the church. But she was living with some people in an apartment who I'd grown up with. And I was like, hey, wouldn't it be funny if they like shunned us like in the apartment? And then they did it. They wouldn't talk to us like in the apartment. I was like, I knew it was crazy, but this shit is bananas.
Like you're like, hey, and they don't respond.
Yeah.
Hey,
right.
I'm talking to you.
So it's, and it's something that, that's the kind of side of it that I've continued to, I don't really know that I've ever taken full stock of what it meant, the impact it had to lose everyone that, but at that point I finished college, and I actually had a good senior year as far as like, I wasn't cutting for a significant part of it. Because the summer when I went away to the theater apprenticeship, I was around people I didn't know, I'd never met. I hadn't cut for a while, so I took it as an opportunity to wear short sleeves around people for the first time.
How'd that go?
It was very, very nerve-wracking.
Oh, I'm sure.
And
like being naked.
Yeah. And it was just like, paralyzingly nerve-wracking. But I did it because I was like, they don't know me, so I can start fresh, and I can have that be a part of my past rather than be assumed that I'm, doing shit that's weird by people, So that was amazing. Senior year, I got out, and then getting out of college, much like getting out of high school, was a really, really hard transition. I didn't know what I wanted to do at all. I was acting in plays in the Sacramento area. My girlfriend and I, in the church, we weren't allowed to date until we were in college. So this was like my first girlfriend who I'd gotten together with sophomore year of college, and we dated for 3.5 years. I broke up with her about 6 months out of being out of college. I think anyway, so things were shifting in a lot of ways. I was out of my first relationship. I was out of school. I was acting in Sacramento. I was still living at home. I didn't have a job. And I was just kind of like, I didn't know how to do what I wanted to do. And I couldn't even have told you what it was I wanted to do. And then things were starting to get, self-injury was sort of reasserting itself again at that point, getting fairly prominent. I was also convinced that when I saw that first therapist, I started taking medication for the first time. I was on Wellbutrin for a number of years. And at that point I was like convinced that it wasn't really making a difference. And but I told my mom that I didn't want to see a therapist again right now. Like I wanted to do something different. So we're out of the church. So I wasn't even interested in seeing a Christian therapist. I wasn't interested in going back to him. And I was like, I just needed something else. So my mom called our insurance because, I still feel like with mental health, it's like everyone kind of has to reinvent the wheel themselves. There's very few resources to help you figure out what to do when. So she called insurance, and they were like, oh, this, they recommended an outpatient program that was covered and was in Sacramento. And so I started going to this outpatient program. And I had no idea what to expect. It was, 5 days a week, like a full day each day. I'd never done anything like this in my life. And I walk in the first day, and it's me and like 12 women, most of whom were significantly older than me. And I was like, turned around and walked down the hall to the nurse's office, the program nurse. And I was like, so I think I'm in the wrong place. Don't know if this is for me.
Right.
And she was like, just give it a couple days. So that was where I was first introduced to things like dialectical behavioral therapy. And it all went over my head at the time. Most of it, some of it pinged because it is very practical, but a lot of it was like, so, you weren't seeing a therapist in the group. It was or in the program. It was groups all day, and it was stuff anywhere from medication education. It's like that was the group I walked in on. My first day was medication education, and they're talking about like fucking serotonin moving from one neuron to another. And I'm like, I don't know about, I don't know what I'm doing here. But it exposed me to things that I wasn't aware of, like DBT and that sort of thing. But at the same time, there was, while it was structured, you're just kind of on your own. And I was still self-injuring. I was hurting myself on breaks in the program.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And, it's one of those things that, right, I was there, I think 3 weeks maybe total. But it feel in retrospect, it feels like I was there a lot longer, because it did start on such a note of like hope and positivity and like something new.
This
and like,
is going to be it.
This is going to be it. Okay, they're giving me prescriptions. Do I need Xanax? I don't know. What is that? Great. So I got put on, right. Yeah. So I got put on Prozac, Xanax, and something else like right away.
They put you on Xanax?
They gave me the prescription.
Yeah.
Because
man, I went to the wrong outpatient.
Right. But it did start on such a note of optimism, but very quickly ground down, into feeling like, I don't know. It clearly wasn't meeting my needs, whatever I was feeling. Cause I was burning, I burned the back of my hand, like all the way across it I had a fork that I would use that I would heat up, and I burned across the back of my hand. So very, very obvious. And it was almost like asking people to
ask me. Right. Ask
and
me
again, I do. And yeah, it's funny. I do take issue. People pejoratively lump self-injury under the heading, they're doing it because they're seeking attention. It's attention-seeking behavior. And I've come a long way, in my opinion, of that, to the point where I'm like, well, yeah, no shit, it's attention-seeking behavior. Maybe you should give them some fucking attention,
I mean, I've seen it be both, right? Like where it's like they're doing everything they can to not have you see it. You happen to find it. Like that's not attention seeking. Yeah.
And if it is out there and you're saying that as a negative, maybe fucking think about how you're viewing it, not about what you think they're doing it for.
Right.
If it's got your attention, maybe look into it a little bit rather than just passing it off,
Right.
But yeah, I think there was an element of like, see me, because we're in these groups, but I didn't feel seen.
Yeah.
And in retrospect. And so, I ended up one day bringing a razor blade, a bandage. I had my little like kit, like in my shirt pocket. I had a razor blade, I had a bandage, and I had a Xanax. So,
I mean, sometimes you got to party an outpatient, right?
Right. And so it was like that sensation of waiting, looking for something to set me off.
Right. Okay.
Looking for something to take me down, So we were in like a small group, and you're just hearing you're just hearing a lot of rough stuff from people. And how can other people's stories not affect you emotionally? And I just remember just getting just pretty depressed, just listening to people's really sad stories about their lives and real shit, And I went to the bathroom, I locked myself in the bathroom, and I cut myself on my stomach, on my abdomen, and it had gotten to the point where when I was cutting myself, I was cutting, and then I was going back into the open wound and continuing to cut within the same wound. So that was like another graduated step where the burning became, if I burn myself once, the fun thing about that is you can burn over the same spot, but now you've already burned the nerve endings off, so you can hold it, you can do more damage. So it was that sort of thing that and so I was like, but then of course the body eventually reacts, right? So I was in the bathroom, and then it was like, not so much reacting to the pain as reacting to like, ooh, something's, that was bad enough, where it was like the blood wasn't stopping, So I put the bandage on, and I buttoned my shirt back up, and I was like, all right, power of positive thinking. head back to the group, because they're going to be missing me in a minute. And I walked into the group, and I almost remember this in slow motion, where I was wearing a button down shirt. But it was untucked. So it was hanging loose, and I had the bandage on, but I saw a drop of blood come out of my shirt.
Oh no.
And hit the floor. And I was like, oh shit. And I stepped on it. I was in a movie,
Yeah.
I covered it because the room was full of people already, but everyone was just getting back from break. And I was like, fuck, this is not going to go well. So I got out of the room without anybody noticing, which I am honestly very grateful for. And I made it down to the psychiatrist's office and told him what I'd done. And he, looked like deer in the headlights. Like he didn't know what I was wasn't computing what I was saying.
Right.
So I was taken to the ER. And though a very vivid memory was I was on the floor of the nurse's office and she was like applying pressure to the wound in the program and waiting for the EMTs to get there. And they get there and, I'm like having it's, a pretty profound experience.
Yeah. and you're sober through it.
The EMT pulls the gauze away and he's like, oh yeah, that's not bad. And I just had this very profound, like sinking feeling,
Oh yeah.
Like,
oh yeah.
Oh,
and you're like, just
seriously?
Yeah. Right. Come on, man.
It was like, go big or go home. And I had fucked it up, but shit's already in motion. They have to send you to the emergency room. And from the emergency room, basically they do the psych eval and they found a bed for me hours upon hours upon hours later. And I was taken to the inpatient program. And from there, it was kind of one of those situations with just kind of, I think after growing up in such a heavily regulated environment of like rules and like keeping my shit together. And it was like, if I'm here, then, fuck it. It was the first time I think I really like just let go. They put me on a lot more medication and I was just, I was reacting poorly to Prozac. And then they switched the Xanax to Klonopin. And so it's just like, my inhibition level was very low, and you're in an environment where if you hurt yourself, you're going to get an immediate response. So it just got bad, I mean, my mom remembers that time that I was inpatient, in and out of inpatient, as the worst time of her life. I remember being high, and it being kind of fun. And very stressful in its own right. I think it's unfair to not honor the degree of stress I was living with at the same time. But I was, and it had gotten like, you don't have implements to hurt yourself or they're harder to come by. So I was like just banging my head against the bathroom floor, just like to the point where it was just like opening my face up, Yeah. And so, but, somehow it's like, again, I like rallied. I was put in on a 72-hour hold, but they reevaluated and I was there for like 14 days. But I rallied and I like got my shit back together and I got out. And then within 2 weeks, I was back in. And that time I asked to go back. And from that point, I've lost like 2 weeks of time. I don't remember them at all. They had put me on lithium at that point as well.
Man, they were throwing it all at you, just trying to figure out what would work.
Yeah. And it's funny. It's like, I feel like a lot of times I talk about it, I come off as like heavily critical of these inpatient environments, but I think I am critical on certain levels, but I do think it was a bit of a perfect storm where we didn't know what to ask for. My parents didn't know what to ask for. And these places, their goal is to keep you alive. I'm alive. So, they don't have any other solutions. So it's such a short time that you're there, in the grand scheme, that there is no time to get you off your medication, get to know you, like find out what's really going on, So I lost a significant amount of time and my parents were doing, furious research and trying to find out what to do. The social worker tells my parents that they think I'm on the verge of a psychotic break. Well, my mom's like, so what solutions are we coming up with? And they had nothing. They came back with nothing. And again, critical of that. Yes. At the same time, I've seen the stacks of case files they're walking through with, how can you even address the minutia of people's, experiences and concerns and needs when you're saddled with that much stuff. And then for the psychiatrists who work those places, they're working their own practice. They're working at other facilities. They're seeing you for 10 minutes once a week, So it's a bit of a perfect storm, but somehow in all her research, my mom somehow gets a phone call from a guy that she didn't even know and didn't know how she was in touch with him, who tells her about the Menninger Clinic in Houston, Texas. And I think the big trouble for my mom in her research and for both my parents was that there's very few there's not a lot of self-injury centered
that really get it. They take people
that really get it.
They take people. They'll take people who do it, but it's not a lot of people who specialize.
Exactly. So for whatever reason, it seemed like a good fit. And yeah, I was in Houston, Texas for like over a month and a half in there. And it was the first time that I was in treatment with people my own age on the unit that was like 19 to 30 years old or whatever, something like that. And people, so dealing with similar life points in their life, even if it's a massive variety of experiences. So that was like the first big turning point to finding some level of recovery. I do think I would be remiss if I didn't touch on the financial burden. And I look back and I don't even know the total extent of the lengths my parents went to and strapped themselves financially. A lot. And I think about the context of, in one sense, it's like I step back from it now and I think about, I was privileged enough to be able to have parents who could strap themselves financially and do it. And I think about everyone, so many people who aren't even in the position to do that, and how our mental health system does not serve them. If they have to do that to get me the care that ultimately made the difference, it's like, fuck, man, it's intense. Yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that. I feel like so many times we talk about recovery and treatment and sounds amazing, and the help that's there in good places are amazing, but good help takes time. And the one thing that time takes more than anything else is a fuck ton of money. So
it's an ugly truth about the system. And, there are people who are able to do it in other ways. That I think the more understood and accepted an issue is, the better the sort of general care is for it. And particularly with self-injury, that is just not something that the general care is going to be able to, it's just not. And then also with general care, when you're looking at things like schizophrenia or schizoaffective, it's going to be a medication. There's just going to be there's going to be, accepted standards of care for things, and kind of where you were like, I wasn't being seen.
Yeah.
Because you're one of that group, like you are, there's no time to see individual people. There's a time to create a standard of care.
True. Yeah.
And that is, that's the scary thing, particularly with self-injury or any sort of things that feel fringe to people.
Yeah. And it's one of the reasons I'm so grateful that, you guys had me on today was, I think, I do think and I'm sure you believe, it's like conversations like this matter to shifting, even if it's very slowly, how we view standards of care and things like that. And what is, Yeah.
So when you get into self-injury recovery, what does that look like? Did you pick a date? Do you have a date, the last how?
There was a long time when I would count days and would keep track. And for whatever reason, it just never really served me that well. I think part of it was just growing up in Grace Valley, where it's like, I would count days. I would have to keep track of like how many days I didn't masturbate, So it's very it's hard for me I haven't found it to be a useful thing for me. I think I was in Houston, and then I ended up coming down to Los Angeles for a step down program. It's called the Optimum Performance Institute. And I had no idea what a step down program was. And I was like, I don't need that. I'm an adult. And it's like, well, no, yes, sure. And it's like in Houston, it was like the first time when I really started to shift my mentality around a lot of things and shift toward, a forward facing direction in my life. And so, the step down program, being able to integrate these sort of new coping mechanisms, ways of thinking into, becoming crafting a independent life that works, for me and that I loved and wasn't relying on these past coping mechanisms. So I think if I had to point to any date, I think moving down to Los Angeles was a dramatic shift that was like the big life change. That being said, I've still been back in inpatient before. I ended up back in inpatient in 2013. So it's not been without its, ups and downs. That's for sure.
Did you want to go to, were you like, I need to go back?
No, I was out of the program. I was in that program in LA for 4 months. I moved into my own apartment. I wrote that play. I got my first real job down here, which is actually still the job I have. I do closed captioning for live TV. So I was, gainfully employed, but I had dated a girl right when I moved down to LA, and that relationship, she had broken up with me about a year after we started dating, and we started dating pretty soon after I got out of the program in LA. So I was sort of newly single in Los Angeles, and basically I had my leftover medication lying around, and I took all the medication, and ended up in the emergency room, and then an inpatient in LA, and that was definitely a blast. It was just like, what am I doing back here again?
Right?
It's a different city, different life. It seemed, and yet. Here I am.
There you go. There you are.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah. And yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I don't keep a date, and I don't keep track of days. And I still, I mean, from time to time, it is my long grooved coping mechanism, negative though it may be, for coping with stress. So I would be lying if I said there aren't times where self-injury pops up as the impulse, and occasionally as something that I still struggle with.
What are your, is there something specific that you do? Or are there people that you call, or do you have a recovery community?
There are people who I can be candid with. I'm dating now, and I've been in a relationship for close to 2 years now, and we just moved in together in the past 6 months. First person I've ever lived with. So that's exciting. And my parents provided this, and my girlfriend, who I'm with now, provides this. There's a sense of, and of unconditional love. No, it's not a condoning of something that makes them upset or that's physically not good for me, but there's a sense of non-judgment. I've also in the past year started seeing a therapist for the first time in a few years. I hadn't been seeing anyone. And that's been an interesting experience, because it's my first time in seeing a therapist, not in like a state of crisis.
Right.
So I remember the first session, I was like, yeah, so this is weird. And so I think the work for me at that point was to trust that I didn't need to manufacture a crisis in order to be heard. Again, I think a lot of it goes back to, my mom telling me and growing up in an environment where it was like mental health being poo-pooed and written off. And then, my parents telling me, look, you don't need to have physical evidence of the problem to ask for help. You can ask for help. Not saying that it's easy to ask for help,
but it's there. It's an option.
It's there. And continuing to hear that, Yeah.
It's okay to ask for help. What does your life look like today in terms of helping? Like, I know you do a bunch of stuff to help with reduce stigma around this topic. Like, could you tell us a little bit about what those things are? And are there more things that you want to do with that?
Yeah, I guess the first big thing I did coming out of treatment in LA was I wrote a play and produced it. It's a solo play, and it's my story basically from growing up in the church all the way through moving to LA. And it's pretty, I think the best thing about it now, looking back, because I wrote it in 2012, the best thing about it now is that it captured the way I thought about self-injury at the time, that I wouldn't, my thinking has shifted so dramatically.
Oh, interesting.
I think it's really important to have those sort of like primary source documents about how we thought of things. So I don't lose sight of how I viewed something and polish it over, I feel like in recovery, I continue to try to be more articulate about the things I've struggled with, but I try to be aware of not, shining it to such a high polish that it's, unrealistic. Yeah, so I did that. I've really tried to take advantage of the, advent of social media and its ubiquity and posting about, about self-injury and posting about, being unashamed to post my scars. The main basic reason I continue to do that, despite whatever censorship pops up, is that there were so many years that I spent that I was so ashamed of my body and of what was on my body, just crippling, long sleeves. I remember I was down in visiting my aunt and uncle, and I was in college at the time, and I went out to Pismo Beach by myself, and I was swimming, and my scars were all like purple from the cold, just like dark. And, at the time I just felt like they were gross, And I remember there's a story in the Bible, and this is also in the play, but there's a story in the Bible about this guy who has leprosy, and he goes to this prophet, and the prophet tells him to dip himself in the river 7 times and he'll be clean. And I remember physically doing that in the ocean, like dunking myself. And we were still in the church at the time, I think. And I remember praying like to the sky, like on this 7th time, to have my scars gone. And of course they were still there when I came up the last time. But I think back to times like that, because I'm so comfortable now, for the most part, with my body and with my scars, and and it's been a hard one, sense of self, comfort in my appearance. But I really work hard to not take it for granted. And those are some of the main questions I get regularly from people who are like, I'm really ashamed, and it's a hard question to answer. Well, don't be ashamed.
Totally.
How do I? What do I do? I've struggled with this for years. What do I do? And I don't have a lot of I don't think bumper stickers are helpful. So I just again, that's one of the reasons I post, because I feel like it's an indirect way of encouraging a level of acceptance. Because if self-acceptance can be, if I can model a degree of honest self-acceptance, then maybe that can, speak to something.
What do people come up and ask you about your scars, and when and if they do, what do you say? So
the number one place I get asked is in the grocery store checkout line by the checker, because, and I understand it, all they're doing all day is standing and talking to people and making small talk for a space of 15 to 30 seconds, so it's, and people don't guess that it's self-injury just for whatever reason by how my scars look. So
they're looking at your hand, right? Your hand.
Well, they're looking at that, because I'll wear short sleeves and I have scars all the way up and down my arms.
It doesn't look like I would think, if I saw your hand, I would think abscess that got infected or burned.
Yeah, so people don't, because my scars don't, for the most part, the more stereotypical looking, lines across have for the most part faded, or it was never really my thing so much. I moved pretty quickly into bigger things. So it's more prominent, like those melty looking burn scars that people think I was in an accident. I have gotten asked if I was a veteran. I was like, oh no, don't, I feel bad. It's like someone's trying to be nice. And I'm like, no, I'm not, But yeah, most often I get asked in the grocery store checkout line, and most often people guess I was in a motorcycle accident or something, or a car crash. And for the most part, I will answer honestly, and I'll say, I actually struggled with self-injury, with cutting and burning myself for a number of years. And more often than not, people feel really bad that they asked. And so I try to keep the conversation going. If it was an honest question, I try to give an honest answer. And if they apologize, I say, for the most part, my response is something to the effect of, it's totally fine. I wouldn't wear short sleeves if I wasn't comfortable asking. And, and occasionally it's I'm happy you asked. And I don't mind at all. And the only times I won't entertain it is if someone's clearly not asking because they're actually interested.
Yeah.
And it could be just me reading tone, trying to read tone. And sometimes I'm just not in the mood, for the most part, I'm not self-conscious, but there are times when I still am. And that's just part of it. I think the mistake would be on social media would be to portray it like I'm, just totally liberated and, perfectly right. In touch with what I've been through. Where it's no, there are times when I look in the mirror and don't like what I see, and I think being able to say those things still is just as important as being able to tell the story of being in a place of recovery and being in a healthy place,
Totally agree. Totally. there are times where I, I think of my story being out there, or I like, there's so much information about me out there, and I get like, there are moments where I get really self-conscious about it. And even, that people are going to judge me, that they're going to judge all the things, whatever it is, like whatever the story I tell myself is, even having, well over a decade of recovery. And I think that's just part of it. You do stuff. There's particularly with coping mechanisms that you can see on your body, right? Like I struggle with binge eating. And so like, if I'm gaining weight, like people can see that. And there's a feeling of being very naked and being very exposed. And, when I was drinking and using, for the most part, at least in my my perception, I didn't feel like everybody knew exactly what was going on. I didn't wear my issues on my sleeve, so to speak. And with stuff where it's related to your body and people can see that stuff, it's very exposing. It's very uncomfortable. And I often think to myself, like, I'd rather have the one where
right.
Like we got it. Like, totally. This is just, I'd rather have the one where you just know nothing, because it's just like, I don't need, everybody has issues. Why do you have to be able to visibly see
Totally.
them?
Well, no, and people say it to me and it's true. They're like, it's as like a reassuring thing, I know, where it's like, like, well, everyone has scars and yours just happen to be visible. And I'm like, yeah, no fucking shit. You're
like, right. That's the part that we're talking
about. That's the part that's, driving me up the wall.
Right. Exactly. That's actually,
the catch. Yeah.
It's so true. It's so true. Yeah. Well, I love what you're doing. I love that you're talking about this. I love that you're willing to show your body and show your scars and show the range of emotion that come with it. Make it into art, make it in, with the play, and come and talk about it. I think it's really important. And, perfect example is like, I work in the mental health field, have for over a decade. And I did not know that it's 60-40 male female. I didn't know that.
That 60-40, female 60, male 40.
Right. Sorry. Yes. I did not know that. I didn't know it was that close. I figured it was closer than we knew about, but that's pretty close. And I know that this is the same thing, and something that I'm also going to explore with eating disorders with men, a bulimia with men and eating disorders with men. These are things, I had someone come on and talk about sexual assault with men. Like, these are things that aren't talked about, and they drive a lot of behavior. And I just think it's so important to have role models come model the behavior of like, yeah, this is what it is. This is how I deal with it. Here's how I answer it. And I can live a normal life.
Yeah.
And I think it's awesome, and super grateful for your time.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. It's been a blast. So
yeah. Where can people get in touch with you or find you, or what's the
easiest way to get in touch with me is on Instagram. Okay. It's my handle's my first initial, my last name. It's B Moroski, BMOROSKI.
Awesome. And anyone who's interested, we are going to post a bunch of resources in the show notes, including Ben's contact information on Instagram, and then some books and some journals about this topic. So please reach out and check out the show notes. Awesome. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
This podcast is sponsored by Lion Rock Recovery. Lion Rock provides online substance abuse counseling where clients can get help from the privacy of their own home. They are accredited by the Joint Commission, and sessions are private, affordable, and user-friendly. Call their free helpline at 800-258-6550 or visit www.lionrockrecovery.com for more information.